I want you to picture something. It's 3 in the morning. The temperature outside is 92 degrees, and inside my apartment, it's so hot that my phone actually shut down to protect its battery. I had already spent $60 on fans. I opened every window. I even tried the internet's favorite lie, putting a bowl of ice behind a fan, and you know what? That did absolutely nothing. 10 minutes later, the ice was water and I was still sweating through my shirt. So I did something desperate. I decided I was not buying an air conditioner, not because I don't want one, but because I look at my bank account and realized I had exactly $0 for a luxury like Central Air. That's when I found this video online. A guy claiming you can build a real ice-cold air cooler for under $20. Parts from a hardware store. No AC required. And I thought, that is obviously fake. But then I thought again, what if it's not? So I spent $100 on the wrong parts, the wrong tools, and 3 failed prototypes. And what I learned in the process changed how I think about cooling forever. This is the story of how I saved $100 by accidentally building something that actually works. Let me rewind. It was late July. My apartment faces west, which means from 2 p.m. until sunset, my walls act like a solar oven. A window AC unit would cost me at least $150. And that's before you factor in the electricity bill, which apparently doubles the moment you press the power button. So I started researching alternatives. Swamp coolers, evaporative coolers, DIY ice chest fans, and the more I watched, the more I realized something strange. There are millions of videos on this topic, and almost every single one uses the same flawed logic. They take a styrofoam cooler, cut 2 holes in the lid, mount a fan on one hole, fill the cooler with ice, and call it a day. And the comments are always the same. This doesn't work. It lasted 20 minutes. Where do you people live? Antarctica? But here's what nobody was asking. What if the design is wrong? What if everyone is copying a bad template? What if you could actually build a DIY air cooler that lasts for hours, blows genuinely cold air, and doesn't flood your floor? That's the question that kept me awake at 3 a.m. So I went to the hardware store. And this is where I made my first mistake. I bought a 5-gallon bucket, not styrofoam, plastic. I figured styrofoam is fragile, it leaks, and it looks like a middle school science project. But plastic? Plastic feels serious. I also bought a small inline duct fan. This is important. Most people use a regular desk fan, but a desk fan is designed to move air across a room. It's not designed to push air through a small hole and over a pile of ice. So I bought a 4-inch inline fan, the kind you use for grow tents or bathroom exhaust. Then I bought copper tubing, because I saw one video where a guy said copper transfers cold better than plastic, and I bought a small aquarium pump. At this point, my total was already at $42, but I told myself it's still cheaper than an AC. I got home, I laid everything out on my kitchen floor, and I started building. I drilled 2 holes in the bucket lid, one for the fan intake, one for the air outlet. I attached the fan, I filled the bucket with ice, and I turned it on. And for exactly 4 minutes, I felt cold air, real, honest-to-goodness cold air. I almost celebrated. But then something happened. The air got warm, then humid. Then I looked down, and there was a puddle spreading across my kitchen floor. The ice had melted so fast that the water was overflowing through the fan hole. I had just built a very expensive room humidifier, and I was angry. That first failure taught me something obvious in retrospect. Ice melts. And when it melts, it doesn't just disappear. That water has to go somewhere. So I thought, okay, what if I contain the water? What if I put the ice inside a sealed container and blow air over the outside of that container? That led me to version 2. I bought a second 5-gallon bucket. This time, I bought a smaller bucket that fits inside the larger bucket. The idea was simple. Fill the small bucket with ice, seal it, put it inside the large bucket, blow air into the large bucket. The air flows around the small bucket, gets cold from the ice inside, and comes out the other side. No water leaks. No flooding. I built it. I tested it. And it was a disaster. The air barely got cold. Why? Because plastic is a terrible conductor of cold. The ice inside the small bucket was freezing, but the plastic wall was acting like a jacket. The air passing over it barely dropped 5 degrees. I put my hand over the outlet and felt room temperature air with a slight attitude problem. At this point, I had spent $68 and gotten exactly 0 results. But I was too stubborn to quit. And that stubbornness is what led me to the internet's worst-kept secret. Here's where things got weird. I was about to give up. I was sitting on my floor, surrounded by buckets and fans, and I started scrolling through old forum posts from the early 2000s, pre-U2, pre-influencers, just nerds in garages. And I found this one thread where a guy living in a desert trailer described something he called the coil method. He wasn't using ice in a bucket. He was using a cooler full of ice water, a small pump, and a coil of copper tubing. Here's how it worked. The pump pushes ice water through the copper coil. A fan blows air across the coil. The copper, being an excellent conductor, pulls the cold out of the water and into the air. No ice touching the air directly. No melting flood. Just continuous cold. I realized I had been thinking about this completely backwards. I was trying to cool the air by passing it over ice. That's inefficient. The better way is to pass the air over something that is being constantly cooled by ice water. And the copper coil is the bridge. So I went back to the hardware store. I bought 20 feet of half-inch copper tubing. I bought a small submersible pump. My total now was at $94. I was no longer saving money. I was losing money on principle. But I bent that copper tubing into a spiral. I attached it to the front of my fan. I ran vinyl tubing from the pump to the copper coil and back into the cooler. I filled the cooler with ice water. And then I turned it on. The first thing I noticed was the sound. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet hum from the pump and a steady whoosh from the fan. The second thing I noticed was the fog. I don't mean smoke. I mean condensation. Within 30 seconds, the copper coil turned white with frost. I'm serious. The coil got so cold so fast that water from the air started freezing to the surface. I put my hand 6 inches in front of the fan, and I actually flinched. The air was cold. Not cool, not slightly refreshing. Genuinely, uncomfortably cold. I grabbed my laser thermometer. The ambient temperature in my apartment was 89 degrees. The air coming out of the fan read 61 degrees. That is a 28-degree drop. I ran the test for 2 hours. The ice water in the cooler melted slowly because the pump was circulating it, keeping the temperature even. After 2 hours, the water was still cold, but not icy. So I added more ice. And here's the key. Because the ice is never in direct contact with the air, it doesn't melt from the air's heat. It only melts from transferring cold to the copper. That means a single bag of ice lasted more than 4 hours. 4 hours of 60-degree air for less than $100 in parts. I sat in front of that fan for 30 minutes just smiling. But I promised you an honest verdict, so here it is. Does this work? Yes, absolutely yes. The copper coil method is real. It's effective. It's not a gimmick. But, and this is a big but, it is not an air conditioner. An air conditioner removes heat from a room and dumps it outside. This device does not do that. This device takes the existing air in your room and makes it colder by passing it over a cold coil. But that cold comes from ice, and the ice came from your freezer, and your freezer dumped all that heat into your kitchen. So technically, you're not cooling your room. You're moving heat from your room to your freezer, which is fine if you have a good freezer and you only need to cool a small area. Here's what I learned. This works best as a personal kohler. Point it at your face while you sleep. Point it at your desk while you work. Do not expect it to cool an entire living room. In my test, the temperature 3 feet away from the fan was 61 degrees, but the temperature 10 feet away was 85 degrees. This is a spot cooler, not a whole room solution. And the second thing nobody tells you is humidity. Because you're blowing air over a cold coil, condensation happens. That water has to go somewhere. In my setup, the copper coil dripped, not a lot, about a cup of water per hour. I put a small tray underneath. Problem solved. But if you build this on a wooden desk without a tray, you will ruin your desk. So the question is, did I save $100? The answer is yes and no. I spent $94 on parts. A cheap window, a C unit, costs about $150. So up front, I saved about $56. But the window AC would have cooler my whole bedroom. This DIY cooler only cools my face and chest. So if you measure value by coverage, the AC wins. But if you measure by electricity cost, the DIY cooler uses a 12-volt fan and a tiny aquarium pump that draws maybe 20 watts. A window AC draws 500 to 1,000 watts. Over a summer, the electricity savings alone would pay for this device 3 times over. So who should build this? You should build this if you live in a dry climate. Evaporative cooling works best when the air is dry. If you live in Florida or Louisiana, where the humidity is already 80%, this will do almost nothing. You should also build this if you rent an apartment that doesn't allow window units, or if you sleep in a van or an RV, or if you just want a fun weekend project that actually produces a useful result. Who should not build this? Anyone expecting central air. Anyone who hates drilling holes in buckets. Anyone who doesn't have access to a freezer for making ice. Be honest with yourself. This is a tool, not a miracle. I learned something weird from this experiment. We spend so much money on solutions that are designed for problems we don't actually have. I don't need to cool my whole apartment. I need to cool the 3 feet of air around my face while I sleep. And for that specific problem, a $100 DIY cooler works better than a $400 portable AC that sounds like a jet engine. I'm not saying throw away your air conditioner. I'm saying question what you actually need versus what you've been told to buy. If you want to see the exact build plans for this copper coil cooler, including the mistakes I made so you don't have to waste your own money, I put a link in the description. Parts list, wiring diagram, even the pump settings I use to get 4 hours from 1 bag of ice. And next week, I'm testing something that might be even stupider, a DIY refrigerator using nothing but clay, pots, and sand. I have no idea if it works, but that's the fun part. Thanks for sweating through this with me. Hit subscribe if you want to see the next failure before I fix it. And stay cool, or at least stay curious.